My name is Evelyn Shaw. I'm not the loud one in the room. I'm not the person fighting to take credit or stepping on others to get ahead. I believe in results. And for 3 years, I delivered them quietly at the marketing department of Sterling and Rhodes, one of the top advertising firms in New York. I'm not a genius, but I'm diligent, strategic, and I understand consumer behavior better than most. The campaigns I pitched consistently exceeded expectations. I was on a roll, until one man turned my hard-earned success into his personal stepping stone. His name? Darren Holt, my direct supervisor. He was charming, tall, and always dressed to impress. The kind of guy who could sell water to a fish and still get a thank you card. But beneath the tailored suits and slick smiles, he was a parasite. The kind that feeds off other people's work and calls it visionary leadership. The Reignite campaign was mine. A bold strategy targeting Gen Z using a hybrid of TikTok trends and in-store AR integration. I stayed up all night creating it, mapping every step, designing the funnel, aligning the visuals with projected market behavior. When I sent it to the team, the subject line was clear. Initial draft. Concept by Evelyn. The next day, we had a board meeting. I sat in the back. Darren stood at the front, and to my disbelief, he presented my campaign slide by slide, without a single change or a single mention of my name. He started with, "This idea came to me during one of those sleepless nights where innovation just hits you. I truly believe this could redefine how we engage with younger audiences." I sat there frozen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap across the table and call him out. But I didn't. Instead, I watched the board nod, impressed. I listened to the VP say, "Brilliant work, Darren. This is the kind of thinking we need more of." My fingernails dug into my palms until I felt pain. But pain is good. Pain reminds you that you're awake, that you're still in the game. 3 days later, the company officially promoted Darren to Director of Marketing. The CEO called him a rising star. They even hosted a toast in his honor. Meanwhile, I got moved to the product support division, a glorified side lane where creativity goes to die. They called it temporary reassignment. I called it what it was, a cover-up to push me into irrelevance. That night, I sat in a corner booth at my favorite coffee shop, my laptop open and untouched cappuccino in front of me. I stared at the original campaign files, my files, with my name and timestamps, safely stored in 3 different places now. A flash drive, a private cloud folder, and a backup email to myself. I wasn't dumb. But more importantly, I wasn't done. I knew Darren, knew his arrogance, his need for validation, his obsession with climbing the ladder at any cost. He thought he'd won. He thought I was finished. What he didn't realize was that he had just lit the fuse. A week later, I attended his promotion party. I wore a simple black dress and stood quietly by the bar, watching him bask in applause and backpats. He laughed with the CFO, clinked glasses with the executive team, and flirted shamelessly with interns, like a king celebrating his coronation. Then he spotted me. He walked over with that smug smile I knew all too well and raised his glass. "Thanks for your support these past few months, Evelyn. I know you'll keep doing great work under my leadership." I smiled, a small, cold smile. "I'll do my best," I said sweetly. But what I really meant was, I'll do my best to bury you, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with facts, with patience, with the kind of strategy he'd never see coming. Because while he celebrated, I was building something far more powerful than a campaign. I was building a reckoning. Most people think silence means surrender, but in my world, silence is strategy. After Darren's promotion, I didn't cry. I didn't complain. I didn't tell HR. I stayed calm, took the demotion with a fake smile, and watched from the sidelines as he strutted around like he owned the damn company. Every day, he passed by my new cubicle, no longer next to the executive meeting room, but in the cramped corner of the 3rd floor. I could smell the ink from the ancient printer next to me. I could hear the interns laughing in the break room while Darren stood in front of flat screens in board meetings pretending to be a visionary. And I let him, because now I had a plan, and I needed to look harmless. I started building my map. Knew if I was going to take Darren down, I couldn't do it alone. He had the board on his side, he had charm, and most importantly, he had momentum. I needed something stronger than just the truth. So I started observing. Every Thursday, Darren had a standing lunch meeting with the CFO, Matthew Parks. But every third Thursday, he conveniently forgot his company card and let Matthew foot the bill. I noted it. On Fridays, he'd leave the office by 3 p.m., claiming to work remotely. But I found his Instagram account. Private, yes, but not to his golf buddies, one of whom just happened to tag him at Edgewater Golf Club on the same days. Noted. Gathered receipts, screenshots, photos, emails, audio. I had no shame in building a case, because I knew exactly what he'd done to me. But information alone wasn't enough. I needed allies. I reached out to Lena, the data analyst who'd once confided in me about Darren shooting down her presentation and later presenting it as his own. She was reluctant at first, scared even. But when I showed her the folder labeled Darren's Greatest Hits, she blinked twice and whispered, "You've been documenting this?" I smiled. Since the day he called my campaign his brainchild. Lena joined me. Then came Omar, the graphic designer Darren once publicly humiliated over a color palette, only to later present the same palette in a brand refresh deck as his own. It took one coffee and one nod before he said, "I've been waiting for someone to do something about that guy." And then Renee from HR. Quiet, polite, and invisible, just like I'd been. She had access. She knew things like Darren's suspicious expense reimbursements and the real reason his previous assistant quit. Spoiler, it wasn't burnout. 3 weeks in, I had a small team. Not loud, not obvious, but effective. We didn't call it revenge. We called it justice by patience. And while Darren climbed higher, we slowly started cutting the rungs beneath him. I planted small doubts in meetings. When Darren announced a strategy, I'd politely raise questions. Not in a confrontational way, just enough to make the board ask him for clarification he didn't have. I emailed project timelines with subtle notes like, "Original concept file from Evelyn, updated by Darren." Always CCing the board. Always with a smiley face. I made sure the seed of doubt was planted. And trust me, in corporate, doubt spreads faster than scandal. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A new campaign was launching. Nova. Darren was assigned as the lead. He didn't ask for help. Of course not. Why would he, when he believed his own lie that he was the genius? But I knew what was coming. The Nova campaign involved integrated AR, the same tech I had studied. For months, and Darren barely understood beyond buzzwords. He rushed the timeline. He picked the wrong vendor. Worse, he didn't test the experience before presenting it live to the board and a potential investor. The AR app glitched. It didn't just crash. It looped a stock animation of a banana dancing in a business suit. I wish I were joking. The room went silent, and then the investor said, "I'm sorry. Was this supposed to be serious?" Darren turned pale. I stood at the back of the room, sipping my coffee, not saying a word. But inside, I was screaming, "Checkmate is coming!" That night, Darren called me. He never called me. "Hey, Evelyn," he said, voice unusually soft. "Could you maybe help me fix some of the bugs in the Nova presentation? I know you're good with this stuff." I paused for 2 seconds, long enough for him to feel the burn. "Sure," I replied sweetly. "I'd love to help." Of course I would. The higher I helped him climb, the harder he'd fall, and fall he would. Revenge isn't a loud declaration. It's a whisper, passed quietly between allies, buried in spreadsheets, hidden in the subject line of an email you almost deleted. By now, I had enough to rattle Darren. Suspicious expenses, lazy habits, a long line of people he'd stepped on. But I didn't want to rattle him. I wanted to ruin him, and for that, I needed access. Enter Renee. Sweet, reserved Renee. She worked in HR, always early to work, always last to leave. most people overlooked. Her, mistaking her quiet nature for passivity. They didn't know she was watching everything, and she didn't forget. We had lunch one day. Just a salad for me, coffee for her. She looked around the cafe before speaking. "I know what you're doing," she said flatly. I paused, fork in midair. "Doing what?" "Collecting," she replied, her voice calm. "I saw the timestamps on Darren's project files. They were all added from your folder. I checked the metadata." I didn't say a word. Neither did she. She just slid a flash drive across the table. No names, no explanations. "But you didn't hear it from me." I took it without flinching. That night, I opened the drive. It contained two things: a report of Darren's reimbursements, inflated, excessive, borderline fraudulent. A resignation letter, dated 6 months ago, from his former assistant. It wasn't burnout. It was a written complaint. Ignored. My hands shook. Not from fear, from focus. The chessboard was getting clearer, and I had just been handed the queen. Next move? Data. I called Lena, our analytics lead, and asked her to help me pull reports on Darren's last 3 campaigns: conversion rates, engagement performance, actual revenue versus forecasted. What she found was beautiful. While Darren took credit for big, flashy ideas, he never followed through. Most campaigns fizzled out halfway. One even caused a 12% drop in user retention, but he'd masked it by skewing the time frame on the report. I compiled it all into a clean clinical deck. No emotion, no accusation, just facts, numbers, dates. It was titled Campaign Analysis, submitted by Evelyn Shaw, confidential. I didn't send it. Not yet. No, I had something more personal in mind. I started playing the long game at work. When people needed help, I was there, answering questions, troubleshooting problems, giving guidance, quietly, strategically. I stayed late, cleaned up Darren's messes when clients were upset, and made sure other departments saw me as reliable, competent, and essential. Meanwhile, Darren got bolder. He started skipping Monday meetings, forwarding projects to interns, bragging about having earned the right to delegate. Perfect. Every time he slipped, I documented it. Every careless message, every excuse, every error he pushed onto someone else. I kept my head down and let him dig his own grave. Then the opportunity came. A new client. Huge. An international skincare brand entering the US market. The pitch was Darren's responsibility. He barely prepared. At the last minute, he called me into his office, smiling like nothing ever happened. "Evelyn, can you throw something together for this pitch deck? You're great with words. Just something clean and catchy. I'll take it from there." I stared at him. Something inside me almost broke. But I kept my face neutral. "Of course," I said. "I'll send you the draft by tonight." And I did. Except this time, the deck wasn't just brilliant. It was flawless. Every slide sharp, every stat backed, every suggestion surgically chosen. I even included footnotes, with authorship. Tags. Each one signed, prepared by Evelyn Shaw. He didn't notice, or he didn't care. The day of the pitch, I made sure I sat in. Darren waltzed into the boardroom, projecting confidence like perfume. He walked the client through the deck. My deck. Smiling as if every word were his own. Then the client's regional director turned to me. "I noticed your name on the footnotes. You were involved in this?" Darren froze. I smiled gently. "Yes, I prepared the framework and research. Darren brought it all together." The director raised an eyebrow, amused. "Well, it's excellent, very polished." And just like that, the illusion cracked. That night, Darren sent me a text. "You didn't need to say anything. That was awkward." I stared at it for 5 minutes, then replied, "Neither did you. 6 weeks ago." He didn't respond. The next day, I printed everything: the reimbursement records, the failed campaigns, the resignation letter, the client pitch credits, the performance charts, The internal feedback, the ignored complaints, the photos from the golf course. I placed it all in a neat binder. Then I walked up to the 25th floor, to the board secretary's office. No appointments, no heads up, just a quiet knock, and a single sentence. I think the board should see this. They say the higher you climb, the farther you fall. But what they don't say is this. The fall doesn't always start with a push. Sometimes it starts with a whisper. It only took 2 days. 2 days after I handed the binder to the board secretary, things began shifting. Subtly. Quietly. Darren didn't notice at first. He was too busy setting up his new corner office, talking about how he planned to redefine agency culture, whatever that meant. But then, small things started happening. Was left off a meeting invite with the new client, the one whose pitch I had prepared. He tried to jump in anyway, but the CFO calmly said, "We've already got Evelyn handling this." His smile twitched just for a second. Crack. The next week, one of the partners asked for a campaign report audit. They never do audits. Not unless someone's been whispering. Darren brushed it off with his usual cocky laugh. They probably just want to see how brilliant I am on paper. But I knew better. And I knew he was sweating. Because behind that smug grin, he hadn't prepared for scrutiny. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't change a thing about how I worked. If anything, I worked harder. Not for approval, but for precision. Every document I submitted was clean. Every project I touched delivered. My calendar was always full, and my inbox was always professional. I was everything Darren wasn't. Reliable, accountable, undeniable. Then came the interview. Not a job interview. An internal review conversation. The head of compliance asked to speak with me, just to clarify a few timelines. I knew what that meant. The board was digging. Hard. I met them in conference room B, not too big, not too small, and always suspiciously cold. There were 2 people in the room, a board liaison and a legal representative. They didn't smile. "We'd like to confirm some details regarding the Reignite and Nova campaigns," one of them said. I nodded. "Of course, I have notes." They asked about dates. I gave them timestamps. They asked about files. I gave them origin folders. They asked about team contributions. I answered with names, roles, and direct quotes from old emails. No emotion, no speculation, just cold, measured facts. By the end of the meeting, the legal rep glanced at me and said quietly, "You're very thorough." I gave a slight smile. Darren trained me well. Word started spreading, not the details. Those were locked tight. But the tension, that couldn't be hidden. Darren's tone got sharper. His jokes didn't land anymore. The interns stopped laughing on cue. He started staying late, the door to his office always shut. Sometimes I'd pass by and hear him muttering on calls, pacing like a caged animal. He was trying to plug holes. The problem was he didn't know where the leaks were. That's the thing about truth. Once it starts dripping, there's no way to stop the flood. One morning, I caught him staring at me during a staff meeting. Not the usual dismissive glance. It was something else. He looked unsure. He gave a fake laugh during a budget update and said, "Well, you know Evelyn, she's got files on files for everything." A few people chuckled nervously. I just looked at him, calm and collected, and replied, "I like to be accurate. That was it." But his face tightened. And I saw it. The fear. Later that day, I walked into the kitchen to grab coffee. He was there alone. He didn't look up at first. But when he did, I saw the panic he was trying to swallow. "You know, Evelyn," he started, "I've been meaning to talk. There's been some noise around the campaigns, people twisting things. You and I both know how this company works. Sometimes things just get confused." I stared at him. Was this a peace offering? No. It was a warning disguised as concern, so I kept my tone even. "I've never been confused about who did what, have you?" He hesitated. "I mean, it's all team effort, right?" I smiled politely and walked past him. Behind me, I heard the spoon in his coffee cup clink too hard against the ceramic. Another crack. That week, two more things happened. Darren was removed from the keynote speaker list for the upcoming industry conference. I was invited to join the quarterly client innovation roundtable, no explanation, no fanfare. Just a shift in gravity. People started coming to me directly with questions, bypassing Darren entirely. Clients CC'd me instead of him. One even asked me, not him, to present the next strategy proposal. He called me into his office that afternoon, slammed the door, and hissed, "What the hell are you doing?" I looked him dead in the eye. My job. The cracks were showing, and I hadn't even touched him yet. All I had done was let the truth out. The fall hadn't started. Not really. But the mask? It was already breaking, and I was just getting started. End of chapter 4. Darren always believed in power through charisma. If people liked him, they'd follow him. If they laughed at his jokes, he was safe. If they clapped, he was winning. But I knew something he didn't. Loyalty built on charm crumbles faster than loyalty built on respect. And once the cracks in his image began to show, people started stepping back. All I had to do was give them a reason not to step forward again. It started with meetings. Darren loved to dominate them. He talked over analysts, hijacked slide decks, and made sure every idea was somehow traced back to him. But now, people weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at me, subtle glances for confirmation, nods when I spoke, silence when he tried to add value. One time, during a creative sync, he tried to pass off an old slogan as new inspiration. I waited, then gently said, "That was actually from a campaign we tested 2 years ago. Didn't convert well." No snark, no malice, just a correction. The room went quiet. Then someone whispered, "Oh, right." Darren's smile flattened. And in that silence, he lost something: credibility. Then came the shifts in behavior. Lena stopped looping him in on performance reports. Omar began reviewing concepts directly with me. Even interns started coming to my desk first. No one announced it. No one rebelled. They just pivoted. Because they finally saw the truth. Darren wasn't a leader. He was a middleman with good hair. And once they realized they didn't need him, I made sure they knew they had me. I didn't buy people's loyalty. I earned it. I helped Lena clean up a messy dashboard without taking credit. I backed Omar publicly when a client nitpicked his visuals. I stayed late to mentor 2 interns through their first pitch deck, one of whom later told HR I should be leading the whole department. I wasn't just replacing Darren's influence, I was erasing it. Then, something happened I hadn't expected. He tried to win me back. Not out of guilt, out of desperation. He asked if I wanted to co-lead a new internal task force, said we could redefine strategy together, told me I'd be empowered. Let him talk, smiled, then said, "I think I'm doing fine where I am." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the person sitting across from him. And in a way, he didn't. Because I wasn't the Evelyn who smiled and stayed quiet anymore. I was the Evelyn who took notes and turned them into blueprints for conquest. At the same time, the board started digging deeper. Darren was asked to re-explain the Nova campaign timeline 3 times. The client he'd embarrassed. With the AR glitch, they pulled out. Finance flagged his travel reimbursements, and HR finally reopened the complaint file from his former assistant, the one he swore was handled. It wasn't. Each of those threads led back to one thing: his leadership, and in every hallway, every elevator, every shared document, the people around him were pulling away. One afternoon, I passed by his office and saw something strange. He was alone. No calls. No visitors. No interns hovering with Starbucks. Just Darren, staring at his laptop with that look people get when they realize the magic trick isn't working anymore. He glanced up, saw me, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw the man. Behind the smirk, cornered. But I wasn't done yet. The final blow wasn't mine to deliver. It had to come from them. The very people who once clapped for him. So I handed them the truth. Not through gossip, not through drama. I shared files. I shared facts. I let them see what I had seen. And the most poetic part? They made the decision themselves. 1 week later, in a closed-door meeting, department leads submitted an anonymous leadership feedback report. I didn't have to be in the room to know how it went. Because the next day, Darren didn't show up to work. By noon, HR confirmed it. He'd been suspended, pending a full investigation. When the email went out, no one gasped. No one asked questions. People just nodded, as if the storm had finally passed. And then, like clockwork, I was called. Upstairs, the board wanted to talk, not about Darren, about me. When Darren was suspended, most people thought that was the end. They figured the storm had passed, that justice had been served. But not me. Because what Darren built wasn't just his title. It was an illusion, a network of influence, of shortcuts, of smoke and mirrors that let him rise faster than he ever should have. Taking his job would have been satisfying, but taking his legacy? That was power. The boardroom was silent when I entered. 5 executives sat across from me, coffee cups, laptops, neutral expressions. "We appreciate your professionalism during recent events," one of them said. "You've been recommended by several teams and clients." I waited. "We'd like to formally offer you the interim director of marketing position, effective immediately." I kept my voice calm. "Thank you. I accept." Simple, direct. But inside, I was already rebuilding the empire he left in ruins. My first move wasn't a speech. It wasn't a party. It was a list. People Darren ignored, people he used, people with brilliant minds and zero spotlight. I promoted Lena to head of analytics. I gave Omar creative authority on 3 new campaigns. I hired back the assistant Darren had driven out, this time as my chief operations coordinator. And I didn't ask for permission, because I had earned something Darren never had: respect. Then I tackled the clients Darren had fumbled: Nova, Helioskin, Green Vibe. All of them had either pulled out or gone cold. I set up meetings, not to beg, but to own our failures. I sat across from each of them, looked them in the eye, and said, "You were misled. That's on us, but I promise you, that version of this agency is gone. Let me show you what it should have been from the start." I expected pushback. Instead, I got interest. Then I got second chances. Then I got contracts. Meanwhile, the internal investigation finished. Darren's suspension became termination. He was removed from all records. Biopage wiped, access revoked, but his damage remained. Outdated systems, bloated budgets, and one final campaign in limbo. The upcoming Momentum initiative, meant to launch the agency into a new market. He'd barely started it. And now it was mine to salvage. Perfect. I restructured the entire campaign in 72 hours. Threw out every half-baked idea he'd left behind, built it from the ground up. Clean, bold, data-backed. When I presented it to the board, I didn't dress it up. I didn't call it revolutionary. I called it honest. They approved it on the spot. That night, I walked past Darren's old office. It was empty now. Lights off, desk cleared. I paused at the door. Not to gloat, to absorb it. Because that office had never made him powerful. It was the illusion he needed to feel important. I didn't need that illusion. I was important, with or without the walls. The next quarter, our numbers exploded. Client retention jumped by 34%. Campaign engagement doubled. Internal turnover dropped to its lowest in 5 years. People noticed. So did the press. I was featured in AdTech Insider as the quiet force behind Sterling and Rhodes' revival. They asked me about my strategy, my vision, my leadership style. I gave them all the right answers, but what I didn't tell them was the truth, that my success started with a betrayal. And I'd turned that betrayal into blueprint. A month later, I got a text, unknown number, no name, just 3 words. "You happy now?" I stared at the screen. It had to be Darren. I thought for a moment, then replied, "Not yet, because I wasn't. He had left wreckage, in reputations, in people, and part of me still burned for every time I sat in a meeting and watched him steal what I'd built. But I also knew I'd already won, not just the job, not just the recognition. I had taken his shadow, the one he cast over the whole department, and turned it into light. Now, they didn't remember Darren as the visionary. They remembered him as a warning, and they remembered me as the one who rebuilt what he tried to destroy. The funny thing about taking over someone's empire is this: you don't just inherit the power, you inherit the ghosts. Darren had built his career on shortcuts and illusions, and once the smoke cleared, I could see every corner he left in disarray, every relationship he neglected, every promise he made and broke. But I didn't rebuild his version of the role. I redefined it, and in doing so, I became everything he pretended to be. It started with trust, not the kind that's printed on team banners or mentioned in press releases, the real kind, the kind that makes people knock on your door not out of obligation, but because they want to work with you. I opened up every pipeline Darren had hoarded, shared campaign strategies company-wide, built a mentorship program, created space for junior voices, and slowly, the walls came down. Ideas flowed freely. Collaboration replaced fear. And the team stopped whispering in corners. They started standing tall. Because when leaders lead for themselves, people shrink. But when you lead for the team, people rise. 3 months into the role, I got a call from the CEO, not a formal check-in. Just curiosity. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I know stepping into a mess like that wasn't easy. I smiled. "Clean slates rarely are." He laughed, then paused. "You've done more in 3 months than Darren did in 3 years." That wasn't flattery. It was fact, and we both knew it. But success wasn't the prize I chased. Not really. What I wanted, what I needed, was clarity. So, one weekend, I took a train out of the city. No laptop, just a notebook and silence. I sat at a cabin in upstate New York and wrote 2 things on a blank page. Why did I stay silent that day? Would I do it differently now? The answer surprised me. I wouldn't have shouted in that meeting when Darren stole my idea. Not because I was scared, but because shouting would have made me like him. Reactive, emotional, messy. What I did? Instead, I dismantled him piece by piece with precision, patience, and purpose. And that was so much louder. When I returned to the office, something was waiting on my desk. A small box. No name. Inside, Darren's old nameplate. And a note. Figured. "You earned this more than he ever did." No signature. But I knew who it was from. I closed the box and placed it in a drawer. Not to forget him, but to remember what not to become. Because revenge had given me power, but integrity gave me everything else. 6 months in, the board made it official. The interim tag was removed. My title became permanent, Director of Marketing. But more than that, I became the benchmark. New hires were trained under my systems. Clients referred us because of the turnaround I led. Former employees, who once left under Darren, they returned. One even said, "This place finally feels like it's being run by a grown-up." I didn't need parades. That one sentence was enough. Then, one rainy Thursday, I saw him again. Darren. Outside the agency building. He looked thinner, older, less polished, like someone still trying to figure out what went wrong. Our eyes met for a brief second. He nodded. I nodded back. No words, no tension, just silence, because there was nothing left to say. His story had ended. Mine had just begun. I walked back inside, umbrella dripping, heels clicking against the marble floor. People passed by and smiled. One handed me a coffee. Another asked if I had time to review a pitch. And just like that, I was home. Not because I took a man down, but because I proved to everyone watching that you don't need to steal a spotlight to earn it. You just need to shine so brightly that the shadows don't matter anymore.